Welcome to the Roundtable Perspective. I'm your host, Tom Roach. I'm joined by my guest today, Dr. Sofía Torallas Tovar, who is a professor of classics and Near Eastern languages and civilizations at the University of Chicago. And she had 2 books come out last year, the Greco-Egyptian Magical Formularies with Christopher Ferroni, and also the Sahidic Gospel of Mark in the 19th century with Anne Boudot. Sofía, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for inviting me.
It's very good to have you here. You have some interesting work that you have. What do these things have in common for you? On the one hand, you're looking at these magical texts, and on the other hand, you're looking at the Gospel of St. Mark.
Well, what they do have in common is that technically the type of work that I have to do to obtain of these texts is very similar. So I work on ancient documents that are very fragmentary, and I try to understand the materiality of these artifacts as like books or documents, and I extract the texts. And these are precisely texts that are not well known, so you have to work also on them from the point of view of linguistics and editorial practice. So they have in common that they come from Egypt.
Right. Okay.
And they belong to the same cultures in a way.
Right, right. So some of these fragments that you find are in museums in different places in the world, and some are being dug up more recently, perhaps, right?
Yeah.
So is it sometimes that the same document has been split up and you find it in different places and you have to try to reassemble it?
Yeah, and it's quite exciting to find matches between fragments that are in different collections. So the market of antiquities in the 19th and the 20th century spread and scattered many books because they were sold piecemeal. So like pages of the same codex or even half pages were sold to different collections, and it's very hard to work on them, and you need also visual memory, which is something I'm kind of losing, actually. In fact, no. So you have, and the moment you match and you find it's kind of you are giving back life to this artifact.
It sort of reminds me of a picture puzzle, and the pieces are scattered out all over
Absolutely.
the world, and you have to fly around and find them.
It's like
right?
a huge puzzle,
yeah.
and also the feeling of having worked on a piece. I'm precisely working on a piece that is currently in Barcelona. And a friend of mine, Alin Suciu, helped me find another piece that is currently in Dublin, and they match perfectly. So you see that both shapes match perfectly. And all the reconstruction of the text that I had done on the part that was lost was confirmed when I found the matching.
Oh, so you guessed
right. So that
right.
was such a pleasure to say wow. Yeah. And then when you see, I think the papyri smile when you put them together because they feel they are back together.
But they don't stay together, right? You have to return them to where you found them.
You can never. I mean, this is thanks to Photoshop and the modern technologies that you can digitally match them because they have all these pieces are very valuable antiquities, and they have to stay in the museums or libraries where they are. So one of them is in a collection of the Abbey of Montserrat, and the other one is in Dublin at the Chester Beatty Library. And so I match them only,
Fascinating. I'm also curious about this market of antiquities. Are these people that kind of like Peter Lorre and Sidney Greenstreet who are dealing? They get a book and they cut it up and they sell one piece over here and one piece over there. Is that really what happened?
Yeah. So there were traders who lived in Cairo normally, and they had their shops, and people had to, when they were bought legally. They had to request permission from the Ministry of the Supreme Council of Antiquities in Egypt, and when they were given permission, they could take. Now you cannot buy anything in Egypt, or nothing can leave the country. But in the past, they would buy, so they went to the shop, and we have evidence of books that were bought in many years apart, parts of the same book were bought many years apart because they were there in the shop. Yeah. So they were in there. And they say, okay, I have this piece, I sell it to you or not. So.
And so where do they come from originally? Where, some of these, I know one of the famous oldest copies of something from the New Testament was found at St. Catherine's Monastery. They were repairing a wall, and they found it in a wall, right? Tell me about some of the things that you found. Like, where did they come before they got to the museums or wherever you found them? Where did they find them first?
Many of the documents I work with come from collections that were created in the 20th century through the market of antiquities. So many of them have no provenance. But I also work with archaeologists who excavate in the south of Egypt, in Aswan, and these the documents that they extract from their excavations, they come to my hands like out from the earth into my hands, which is also a pleasure. And these are of course you have the exact provenance because you know where, and they can describe even the type of building, and they can give you even a date, an archaeological date. So it's such a different way of working with documents that come from a museum in Dublin, or like coming out from from the earth, from the sand of Egypt.
I think when they see this, lots of college students are going to want to switch over to major in whatever you studied here, so they can go do this. It sounds fascinating. So now let's say you've got this piece of papyrus here, right? What do you have to do? Do you have to like wear a special, coat, and do you put gloves on, and are there routines you have to use when you're dealing with these things?
Often when you work with papyri in collections, they are already, they have been placed between glass.
Okay.
So in some collections, they ask you to use gloves anyway. Once in Oxford, I had to read, instructions before they gave me anything. They said, you have to read this. I read it. I say, you cannot use a pen. You have to only use a pencil. I say, don't sneeze on the papyri. But so you have to be careful with them. I have worked also with papyri, like not between glass, like actual papyri. You have to be very careful and handle them with tweezers or try not to touch them.
So like a stamp collector with stamps,
right? They are very delicate. So in some cases they are very brittle. So you have to work when you work with them or restore them, one has to be like very careful.
Now the fact that these are still here after so many years, I mean, that must be because there have always been people who have been collecting these things. Is that fair to say?
The papyri?
Yeah. I mean, like these magical. These recipes for curses and things like that in the book of the handbook of magic that you put together. They weren't all just collected by people who were trying to put curses on things. They were collected also, I assume, by people who were just collectors, right?
You mean it's a very interesting question. Because like one of the things that we are trying to find out when in our project about the transmission of magical knowledge is who really collected all these recipes. And because we have now we have edited more than 50 fragments and magical handbooks, like more complete, but some of them are very fragmentary. And we wonder who collected them and for what reason. And some of them are even bilingual. They are in Egyptian and in Greek. Some of them are purely in Greek. And then here we wonder if they are collecting traditions that are Greek or mixed traditions or translating Egyptian traditions into Greek. So the traditions themselves, how they are adapted and collected into these handbooks are very interesting. But also, it's interesting to us to understand who is the user of these books, if they are collected to be read or really to be practiced. Because some of these books look like just reading for pleasure, reading like magical hymns and recipes, and others seem to be like actual instructions for how to create an amulet or put a curse on someone, curse on someone. So it's not clear, and it's like, well, if you compare it to, like, for example, cookbooks. So some cookbooks are beautiful, and you wonder if they are used to like have on the coffee table, or they are used in the kitchen and they get all like full of like splashed with the while you are using them, and they are like this, like stained. And some of them are like beautiful, and they have photographs, and you look at them, you read the recipes for the pleasure of reading. So something similar must be happening with all these books, because some of them really look like books to be just read for the pleasure of reading.
Do you, there's stories about some of the previous owners dying mysteriously or anything like, disappearing in a puff of smoke or anything?
No, we do not have so much evidence in literature about how these books were used.
Oh.
So that's why we're trying to reconstruct who were the users and who were the scribes using the books themselves, and trying to understand their training, how they use the kinds of handwritings, to try to see the background, the education and the training they had, because that can tell you a lot. If you write in a specific, very trained handwriting, that means that you have very good education. And if the handwriting is very clumsy, perhaps your background is different. So we're trying to reconstruct that. But from literature in general, we have like a few episodes in novels or in telling like specific people, but some of them were like satirical. So you cannot really tell if these stories are real. Can't tell you one.
Okay, good.
There is a story. Lucian wrote a work called The Lover of Lies. Okay. So he collects many anecdotes, and one of the anecdotes is about a haunted house. And
this is what period of history?
This is the 2nd century CE, the Common Era.
Okay, a haunted house in the 2nd century. Okay, that's great. I'm liking this. Go ahead.
So nobody wants to live in the house. Well, it's like the beginning of any movie today.
Yeah.
So there's this guy who says like, I'm gonna spend the night in the house, and I'm gonna.
I saw this movie. I know this. Yeah, it's an old plot.
But probably in your movie, they do not own a powerful book of magic, which is what he had. Yeah. So at some point, he waits, and then the ghost comes out and tries to scare him off. And he's told that many people have died because they had tried to sleep in the haunted house. So he pulls out his book and opens it and looks for the adequate recipe, and he pronounces a powerful logos in the Egyptian language, and poof, the ghost disappears, and he frees the house from.
It has a happy ending.
Yes.
Oh, that's good. That's very
But
contemporary.
It's interesting that he has a book.
Yeah.
And the book has powerful Egyptian formula. So it's interesting.
A handy thing to have. Before there was a Boy Scout manual, there was a curse manual apparently. Right? Yeah. That's good.
Yeah.
And you talked about them being written in the same book would be Greek and
the Egyptian.
And Egyptian. And I understand that the Greek writing is left to right and the Egyptian is right to left. Is that right?
Yeah. So it's very difficult to edit that. So we've had like editorial, practical, typographical problems with that. Yeah. Because like Greek is written like Greek today. It's also written left to right. And demotic, goes on the other. But sometimes when they, for example, have a contrasting list of ingredients, for example, which is something that we have. So you will have them on one side, they are in Greek, and coming from the other side, they are in Egyptian. So they are facing each other.
Yeah.
So it's the page setup is very curious, and it's interesting to study how the scribes, because we wonder, is it the same scribe who could write in both languages?
Yeah.
Or is it a different? So one I said like, okay, I write this, and then here, Tom, like finish it, because I can only write Greek. You write the Egyptian.
Well, that's interesting. So. And that must teach you something about the two languages, right? I mean, they're sort of like little Rosetta Stones, because you've got the same thing in both words.
Yeah.
So,
Yes. So sometimes like things that are difficult to read in one language, if you can like, and it gives you also a lot of information about how these two languages interfere, like how Egyptian and Greek in contact. So there's loan words from one to the other, or expressions that are in Egyptian are literally translated into Greek, and they sound strange for Greek, but they are calques. They are like literal translations. So there's a lot going on in linguistics also that are interesting in those.
Like we have French words and German words that are considered part of the English language.
Or
right?
Spanish, you have tacos.
Of course, yes, we do. We have lots of tacos, thankfully. And so you also then try to see beyond these texts to try to determine what the culture was like that produced them, right? And I know we talked a little bit about, who was collecting these. Were they people who were using these curses, or were they people who were just reading about them out of curiosity? But you've learned something about the production of them and the exchange of them and things like that. So just give us a little more about that. What was that environment like?
Yeah, so one of the things that we do, like, as I said, since we do not have so much information from literature or anything telling us, like, these are the typical people who were copying, and so we do not have that. We have also some legal regulations about you have to burn all the books, but that's all we have. So you have to look at the books, and when you find a magical handbook that is copied with the same format and the same type of handwriting as a Bible, that is produced at the same time. So if you have the Gospel of Luke and the magical book written in the same and copied in the same, like the books look exactly the same, the same size, not the same person, but a person with the same font. It's like this. It's like fonts, like the handwriting. So using the same handwriting, so you know that these two scribes have been trained in the same tradition. So, and these books circulated and were sold and were produced by order. You know? So they were produced by similar people. So there's not like an underground school of scribes who are copying magical books. It's like the same scribe who is copying the Bible for the local church. He's also...
It's like there's a scribe shop on Main Street in Cairo.
Yeah, we don't really know, but they were trained. So when you see like when the handwriting is very neat, and so it's professional. So there were professional scribes that produced whatever they were asked to produce.
Well, they had need for copies like we do, I'm sure, right? So we have machines that do that, and they have people that was their
then they had
right?
people. There is a funny story.
Yes.
This is in a Christian life of a saint, which contains a few stories about book production, and it's very interesting, and about bans of specific books, including, books. The magical handbooks were considered heretical, like other heretical books. So
so this is all during the Christian era that we're talking about, right? So these were prohibited.
Yeah, exactly. But they still were copied. And so, and there was the story about a professional scribe who is asked to produce a copy of a magical handbook, and he looks at it and he says, "Oh, this is banned. I cannot do that." And he goes and accuses the guy who has ordered the book to the authorities, and he's arrested. So we see how that gives us at least an insight into who would copy a magical book and how. So using the service of a professional scribe, which is interesting. But we do not know if you can apply all that then to the evidence we have. But at least if you have like a book that looks like a Bible, a contemporary Bible, you can imagine that the scribes were trained with the same background. And they were probably professional.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So there's a project called the Transmission of Magical Knowledge. That you're affiliated with here. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. So I started this project with Professor Chris Faraone 7-8 years ago, and it is funded by the Neubauer Collegium at the University of Chicago. They have been supporting us for all these years, and what we did was start a team of scholars from everywhere, from Europe and also from Australia. And the U.S. of course, and what Chris and I did was like distribute work and harmonize the work into like editions with translations and commentaries of each of these books. But then we produced separately a book of essays with like chapters and specific studies on how these books were produced. So it's like not only the textual work on the books, on the handbooks, on the magical handbooks, but also the study of their materiality, the book as an artifact, which contributes to understanding the circulation and the production of books in antiquity. In this case of magical books, but I think many of these things apply in general to how books were copied and how they circulated. technical books, medical, astronomy, even like more technical books about like agronomy or things like that were produced in a similar way.
So the ones that were illegal, essentially, right, were hidden. And that contributes to their still being around, I take it, right?
Yeah. So we have examples, a few examples of books that are in perfect state of conservation. I will say perfect. If you look at them, perhaps you think they are a bit like damaged. They are damaged, of course. They are 2,000-year-old.
They're old.
So, but we have a number of findings that with books that are in perfect state of conservation, and in all cases, these books are were considered either heretical or they were banned. One of the cases is the Theban Magical Library, which contains, we have like a number of books, and they are very well preserved. They were rolls, they were codices, and they were very well preserved. We have another case, which is a library known as Nag Hammadi, which contained 13 books with texts that were that belonged to like a Christian, let's call it sect, called the Gnostics. So they were considered heretical, and they were also hidden inside a jar, and they are perfect if you look at them. They look like all the pages are there, and they are perfectly.
So jars are good things to
jars are good things to keep books.
Yeah, okay, we've learned that today. That's very good. And then there was a transition from scrolls to codexes. Could you explain a little bit what the difference is and when that happened?
Yeah. So our corpus starts like from the earliest documents that we have in like these Greco-Egyptian magical formularies. Start in the 1st century BCE, and we cut artificially. We cut in the 5th because the material after that is a bit different, but in this period precisely is when the transition of the book format of roll, which was a horizontal roll with columns like this, and that's why how literature was normally copied and circulated. There was like a transition into the format of the codex, which is exactly like books look today. And this transition was gradual. So there were like at the beginning when the codex appeared, it was considered like only used for like lower literature, and, and like Homer should be copied in like nice rolls. But then in the 4th century, like virtually all literature was copied in codex. And
which made it possible for the movable type and the printing press to be used, right? So that was an important transition,
Yeah, well, and also it was, I don't know, if you think of like a roll that uses only one side, you save material and it's like easier to carry. So there's many advantages to the codex, although the roll has other advantages. But this transition, it's also, you can also notice this transition in the corpus that we're using. So the magical books have the same types of formats of books throughout this time. So they were regular books. That tells us that they were regular books.
Yeah. So what is it about the materials that made them survive? We have papers from 2 years ago that are turning yellow and falling apart today. Why did this material last so long?
So papyrus is. I said before that papyrus is very brittle and so on, and you have to handle it with care. But it's very resistant. I mean, the material is very resistant. And if you think of, I remember these books from the 50s that are like becoming yellow on the edge, and they are like, it's like they will be. They literally are like
they're disintegrating. I mean, those pocketbooks that when I was a kid that I bought, I saved some of them, and they're
and they are very bad quality. The paper is acid. I don't know, but papyrus was quite resistant. It's made of fibers of like vegetable fibers that were like pressed together, and it's very and then it was polished, of course, to be able to write on it, and it's very resistant. And then vellum, like parchment, is very resistant. So so that's why we have codices that are like 15 centuries old and they are still there.
So just quickly, how did you get started in all this? What intrigued you initially?
At the beginning, I wanted to be like an archaeologist, and an archaeologist. But then with time, I was so fascinated with languages, with ancient languages, that I ended up studying classics and working more on the texts and the languages than like going to doing field work and doing archaeology. But I've always been fascinated by antiquity, so I don't know when it started.
Well, that's good that you stayed with it.
Yeah.
It's been good for you. That's all the time we have for our program. Thank you to Dr. Sofía Torallas Tovar for joining me today on Roundtable Perspective. I'm Tom Roach. See you next time.